Hi, I'm Jake Von Slat, and this is my latest project. A couple of years ago, I did a project where I had some intricate brass plates that I needed to cut and then polish. It was a microphone that I built for Cheyenne Wright, who is one of the people who works on the comic Girl Genius. And he was looking for a microphone to do the Girl Genius radio theater act that Phil Folio and Kaya Folio and Cheyenne did at conventions. So he wanted a microphone that could, look really fancy. So I started with this design for this intricate brass plate, and I did something that was kind of new for me. Is I farmed that out. I had those water cut, and then when they came back, they needed to be polished, and I bought a vibratory tumbler to polish them, and that worked really well. I bought one of the Eastwood, fairly inexpensive vibratory tumblers, but the second time I used it, it didn't seem to be as good, and when I took it apart to figure out what was going on, I found that the bearings in the motor were completely shot. It was really under-engineered for what it was. So I kept the parts of it that were unique to the tumbler, these plastic bowls, and the tumbler came with two of them. It came with one filled with a rust removal deburring compound, and the other came with these walnut shells, which are used for polishing brass. So I kept these two bowls, and eventually I built this device. And this is a combination of junk that I had kicking around the place. This is more of my post-apocalyptic engineering. So these are Volkswagen Beetle brake drums. I think they're both rear drums, but it may be a front and a rear drum. I'm not really sure. But, in 1971, they were all drums, all four drums. And I machined those on the mill. I cut the centers out. And for the top one, I machined some pockets for the springs to sit in. The two drums are connected with, these are pieces of black iron pipe that I've just cut off, and there's a threaded rod that goes through the center, of 5/16 inch threaded rod, and that's bolted at the top and the bottom. I fabricated a sheet metal bracket to hold the motor in place. Now, originally, the motor that I was going to use was this nice little motor. It's a little 8 horsepower motor that I got off an oil burner, and it was just the right size, and I thought it was going to work really well. It didn't have any ventilation or anything because it had a blower on it. It got like plenty of air moving through it anyways, so I was a little concerned that it might overheat. So I drilled a bunch of holes in the back plate, and then I 3D printed this fan to go on the end, and this is something that I think 3D printers are really, really good for the tinkerer. Very often there'll be some little problem where you need a specially shaped piece to retain a wire, or you'll need a clip to hold something in place, or you'll need a fan like this. And this I designed up in about 10 minutes in Autodesk's 123D software, exported it to an STL file, started printing. It took like 3 or 4 hours to print, but that's largely an unattended process, and I got just exactly the little fan that I needed, and it worked perfectly for cooling the motor. Unfortunately, being an oil burner motor, this drove a squirrel cage fan, and it's a 3450 RPM motor, and that turned out to just be too fast for a vibratory tumbler. And I had built everything for this particular motor. Fortunately, some time ago, my father-in-law gave me a box of junk. And I had all kinds of junk. It was mostly Volkswagen spare parts, but in among those parts was this motor. And this is some sort of open frame household appliance motor. I think it came from a dryer because it had this little pulley on it, which is typical of front-loading dryers, but I'm not really sure. But it's 1700 RPMs. It fit right in here. I even was able to use the same sheet metal bracket that I built that I fabricated for the 3400 RPM motor, and it worked perfectly. Let's see, what other components here? Springs. These are valve springs from a 1969 Buick Electra. I could only find 2 of them. I thought I had more, but I just couldn't locate them. So these 2 other opposite springs here, and we'll show close-ups of this, are from a Razor scooter. And this was actually a mistake. I really should have used 4 springs of the same strength, because these Razor scooter springs are a little bit stronger than the Buick Electra valve springs, and that means the ball rocks this way a little bit more powerfully than it does this way, but it still works quite well. The appliance motor is held in place with a sheet metal bracket. It's connected to a connector that I fabricated on the CNC mill, which is welded to the end of a spring. There's another connector at the other end, and that has a length of threaded rod screwed into it where there's a brass weight, and that is the offset weight that provides the vibration. The other end of that connector is inserted into a 3/4 inch ball bearing that's affixed to the bottom of this aluminum plate that I milled to mount the media bowl on. This is the aluminum plate that I milled to mount the media bowl on. I lightened it as much as possible, but still wanted to make it strong, so it was milled from a piece of 1.25 inch cast aluminum that I had in my warehouse. There's a layer of rubber to keep the ball from turning. So I used 2 different types of springs to mount the platter onto the brake drum, and that actually turned out to be a mistake. So as you can see, when I add a weight at the top of this length of threaded rod, I really get more aggressive motion inside the bowl. The black springs are valve springs from a 1969 Buick Electra, and the red springs are front suspension springs from a Razor scooter. And the red springs are actually much harder than the black springs, so the platter moves to the right and to the left a little bit more than it does to the front and the back from this view here. And that means the media does not swirl quite as well as I'd like it to, but it does the job. So I'm satisfied with this, but when I do find some more springs, I will probably replace these with springs all of the same strength. And that's how I built my tumbler. This is Jake Von Slat. See you next time.